Hi, fellow geochemists and geochemistry enthusiasts. Welcome to Geochemist Tea, the only podcast for people who love geochemistry with a side of tea. This is a short episode that we're releasing ahead of our episode with Pim van Geffen on August 11th. This short is a series of rapid-fire questions that actually lends towards a great summary of our interview, but also is a great baseline for common mistakes made by geoscientists that aren't taking geochemistry seriously enough.
So Pierce ended his paper with a checklist of points to consider in applying basalt discrimination diagrams to unknown lava suites. Your workflow, as we've chatted about, fundamentally involves creating new discrimination diagrams for most projects that you work on. Following some of the points he outlines in the paper, I have some points that I just want to clarify with your workflow, which I think might help for anybody else that's interested in creating their own diagram. So first, and like I said, rapid fire, sample collection. What are your recommendations when you've not been involved at this stage?
So yeah, as I said, if you have not been involved in the sample selection, but you do get given a existing data set, is to do this as I just described really briefly, this EDA workflow. And you don't just have to look at immobile elements, but you look at all your elements, and you look at you see if you can identify particular clusters, and if you can, and they're a reasonable number, so not hundreds, but 5 to 10s, then you can actually use that sort of this empirical clustering to then follow up. So I described this process before already, but this is where you then follow up to make sure that you get your labeling correct, right? So you go back and forth with your logging data, and if the logging is really consistent, then you can just apply the logging labels to your different suites, your different compositional suites. If it's not so consistent, you can go back and say, hey, perhaps we've misclassified here. Can we have a look at the core again? Perhaps there is a petrographic record and there's some thin sections made by someone at some point. So you first always look for all the existing data whether you can apply the correct label. And if you can't, then you can go back and say, let's do some quantitative mineralogy, better descriptions, and make sure that we really understand what materials we're looking at and give them proper labels.
Great. So then next step, geochem analysis. What's your recommendations when planning a survey? What do you take into consideration to select the correct package, digest, finish?
Yeah, excellent point. Okay, so my advice to anyone starting a drill program, we're not going into the early stage exploration, but say you start drilling. Say you have a budget for 10 holes this year, drill 9 and just get full characterization. So get that complete characterization package from the lab to analyze everything. So the reason I say that is that once you really understand the rocks that you're dealing with, now you can dumb it down and say, okay, well, we only need a 4-acid digest with maybe some sulfur speciation because I'm looking at, a supergene system here with copper in various phases. So start with that full characterization. So don't look at, don't get sticker shock because a total characterization package, it costs 4 or 5 times your Acarita digest, but there's a reason for that because it includes 4 or 5 different methods, right, to characterize your material. So if you know little about the rocks that you're dealing with and you have a drill program that you're starting, just get the best data first. And at that point, the relative cost is actually much less than if you've drilled 100 holes, you've analyzed them all by ecoregia. Now convince your exploration manager that you need to go back to the lab and reanalyze everything by a different method. Good luck convincing them, right? That's just not going to happen. So do it right early on. Get everything there is to know about your rocks that might be relevant downstream, including carbon and carbon speciation, because this goes into waste characterization. If you don't know the composition of rock in terms of waste, then you have to do all kinds of expensive environmental test work later. So if you can include it early and you get a good sense, perhaps you can then you run your regressions. Perhaps you can address it and proxy it from your multivariate data from a 4-asset digest, so you don't need to keep doing it for all your samples. But consider all these things. Consider before you start drilling, even consider all the possible uses of the data downstream. So everything downstream, from mining, processing, to closure, post-closure, reconciliation, and reclamation, all that, and then make sure that you do that first thing. Yeah, and that is my general advice, because the cost of your drill program, especially in a remote area, if you add up the total cost of getting that sample, which is essentially the reason you're out there, is then that marginal, the analytical cost is really marginal. If you add up all the dollars that go into acquiring the samples that you get for that summer, right?
You will never hear me disagree with that statement.
So anyway,
never
just get the full data early on and then dumb it down, not the other way around. It's from a cost perspective and total project value. There's way more value in understanding your rocks properly and characterizing them well and reducing the risk, because the more knowledge you have about your rocks, the less risk in the actual value calculation. So that should just be an easy sell early on to your exploration manager.
Yeah, totally agreed. Next question. Your work, predominantly now is in geomet, although in the past you've worked in exploration of a range of commodities. And so when working through these different fields, how do you apply the concept of screening samples to each different project?
Yeah, good question. This again, if you're working in the exploration stage and you're not drilling yet, but you're really looking at surface materials, it's really easy to generate all kinds of anomalies and red dots on the map. It really comes down to sample selection, and this is where you need to understand exactly how. So, well, ideally you're involved yourself and you get to lay out the program, you run your orientation studies, and you pick you really put down, write in stone how your sampling protocols, so that it's all standardized. And if in case you just end up with legacy data, or someone else has run an exploration program for you, you want to look for that SOP. Was there a proper standard operating procedure, and what was it? Was it consistent depth sampling, or was it consistent horizon sampling, or was it understanding that if there was not such a thing in place, then you need to be a bit more suspicious of your data set. And sometimes you just get fed garbage, and it's hard to then tease out the signal from the noise if what you're given is mostly noise. And there's lots of ways to introduce noise. And as a geochemist, again, if you have any involvement early on in a project, make sure that consistency is the first thing in exploration, but even also in production data. Being consistent is way more important than always following the latest trend and updating through your program.
Yeah, totally.
So screening, the screening comes in there. And other than that, we already talked a little bit about the screening for rocks and lithogeochemical data. That's where you just where I would use the data to screen, right? So I would calculate an Mahalanobis distance, right, to understand what are the outliers and then exclude those from my characterization. So that in that sense, I use the screening on the data rather than on the samples because I wasn't involved in the sampling selection myself.
That's an interesting point, especially with a lot of historical data that just has very little metadata attached to it, and you're just left
Exactly.
mostly guessing. Yeah. All right, last three questions here. So, plotting geochem patterns, identifying rock types, in this case with Pierce, classification basalts. This was his guide towards discriminating these basalts. So for each project that you've worked on, do you find that you have a similar workflow and that one diagram will not solve everything, but rather there are a series of steps in your workflow towards the ultimate discrimination diagram? And do you find that these are generally repeatable between projects, or do you really have to do something new every time?
I would say I don't freeze my workflow. So I don't have a standard set of diagrams that I just run through and test. Some people do, and that's fine. It's not to invalidate their workflows. My workflow is to, sure, I'll look at at some standard diagrams, but then I'll, as I just described earlier, I'll really look at the data themselves, like the data distributions, the bivariate and the multivariate plots, right? And this is another thing I think that geochemists are sometimes a little bit humble about, but they shouldn't be. Is that geochemistry is really it's multivariate statistics, and it's understanding multivariate space. So it's multidimensional space. It's multidimensional thinking. And I don't know, when I was in high school, I just didn't have the patience to do my math homework. So the multivariate space seemed so abstract. But now I live and breathe it every day, and it's actually not that complicated. And the idea is just that if you can extrapolate from a line to a plane and go from 1 dimensions to 2 dimensions, from a plane to a space that is 3-dimensional, and then hyperspace is just this hyperdimensional space that we work in every day. If you have 20, 30, 40, 50 variables, you have as many dimensions to work in, right, as a geochemist. So it actually gives you a lot of space, hyperspace, to work with, to really understand, the character of the materials that you're working with, whatever setting you're working in, and so understanding some basic what they call dimensionality reduction techniques. So one of them would be, the simpler ones are principal components analysis, where you look at all the linear relationships and then you reduce it to a 2 or 3-dimensional plot to help you understand the groupings and trends, right? So you usually then see what elements correlate and which among each other. And so that's a quick way of doing things. And now that we're getting more and more into machine learning space, everybody's starting to code. Or if you don't code yourself, then you just hire a coder, someone out of undergrad, and chances are they understand Python or R well enough to really help you do all this work. And there's lots of tools out there to help you with dimension reduction. Where the whole point is to see data structures in hyperspace and reduce them to a 2-dimensional space to still maintain the relative relationships between the different data clusters, so to say. So yeah, I mean, we don't all have to think in hyperspace all the time, but it helps to do the little thought experiment of okay, well, I have so many variables, that means I have so many axes in hyperspace, and what do I do with it? And then there's these particular techniques that help you understand the data relationships. And if if you spend some time just meditating on that, it really helps with understanding multivariate data.
Yeah, meditating. Who has time, right?
Anyway, so yeah, this is a very roundabout way. I went off on a bit of a tangent to say that, yeah, every time it's new, every data set's new, every project's unique. So don't get bogged down in standardized workflows or diagrams. This is also really coming back to the point of reading this paper. It's to sort of give you the tools to understand that, you know, this diagram was also constructed with the best data available at the time.
Yeah.
Now we have so much data and we have so many tools to interrogate our data, that there's any diagram can be generated, right? We haven't even talked about alteration systems and, you know, generating alteration indices, for instance, from these kinds of diagrams. There's just so much opportunity as a geochemist to be helpful in both exploration and geomet.
All right, 2 quick questions, Pim, just to finish off this series, because I promised them 3 more questions and I can't just leave them with 1. So rapid fire. At some point, does other geological information become helpful in your analysis? We've heard you talk about some of the core logs that you use. Anything else that you want to say?
Yes. Well, rapid fire. I guess you rapid fire, which also implies that I rapid fire back to you. Sorry, I missed that point. Now, yes, all geological knowledge that you have available on your sample should be considered and used and reviewed. And if you don't have it, then you should ask for it and or try and get it yourself. So it doesn't work in isolation, right? We're geochemists. We're not just chemists. We're not just data scientists. We're geoscientists. So you have to always be able to put it back into the geological and spatial context. So absolutely, all GIS data, the more you have available to give context to the data structures that you observe, the better your interpretation will be.
Absolutely. Because I find also, especially, you know, not looking at things spatially as well. I mean, you could have made the most amazing clustering, for example, and you could be like, oh my God, this is just everything, my dimensionality reduction, my clustering, everything's working out great. I got 7 different clusters, but you go and you put it into 3-day space and maybe they're all over the place. And therefore, what did you really learn? Nothing. Last question, how do you address unresolved samples and sample ambiguities that you have?
Yeah, well, that's a broad question.
Oh no, yeah.
This is a rapid fire question. Well, in the exploration setting, you're looking for the anomalies. If you identify anomalies, first go chase up whether you can explain them already from existing data. So if there's any supporting data to go with, you know, if you have stream sediment data and you see that, oh, well, I see a lead anomaly, and I want to go chase it up. Now, first put it on the map and see if it's next to a road, right? So if you see that this is just downstream from the road and it was taken right next to the highway, then perhaps there's some contamination that you need to deal with, you know, that you're looking at rather than an actual metal anomaly you want to chase up and drill. So this is where, again, going back to the previous question, you know, if you don't know where it came from, you know, you should treat it with some suspicion. But if you can put it on the map, you should always do. If you can identify any reason that is not geological, that a sample may look different than the others, then you should use that.